Sometimes a guy thinks he's hidden his feelings so deep that nothing can touch them again. For 15 years, Jedediah Halt lived by himself in a cabin up in the Montana mountains, sure that being alone was the only way to heal a heart that lost everything it cared about. Then, out of nowhere, a huge snowstorm brought Charlotte Whitmore right to his doorstep. When he carried her, all passed out, into his cabin, something inside him woke up, something he thought was gone forever. She was a fancy city lady, the kind of person he swore he'd stay away from because she could mess up the walls he built around his broken heart. But the wild mountains don't care about what a guy wants, and neither does love. What happens when a guy who's great at surviving finds out he can't fight the one thing he never expected? Before we keep going, tell us where you're listening from. And if this story grabs you, make sure you're following, because tomorrow I've got something super cool planned for you. A beat-up leather journal sat closed on the rough wooden table, full of secrets Jedediah Halt hadn't looked at in 3 years. Inside its worn pages were pressed wildflowers like mountain lupine and Indian paintbrush, next to pencil drawings of a woman's kind face, Sarah's face. That journal was his buddy during the toughest nights when memories felt like a gift and a pain at the same time. But lately, he'd been strong enough to leave it alone. Outside his cabin, the Montana wilderness went on forever in every direction, a huge place of pine trees and rocky cliffs that became his safe spot. In November, snow covered the high mountains, turning familiar paths into dangerous trails that only someone with 15 years of mountain know-how could handle. The closest town, Copper Falls, was a tough 3-day ride through land that didn't forgive mistakes. Jed went through his morning chores with the ease of someone who'd simplified life to just what he needed. At 39, his body was strong and lean from hard work and careful living. His hands, rough from years of tough tasks, were still, gentle with things that mattered, like his horse Thunder's nose, the smooth handle of his rifle, or the worn edges of the few books he kept from his old life. The cabin itself showed off his skills and his love for being alone. He built it. From pine trees he cut down himself, sealing the gaps with mud and moss to keep out the freezing winters. It was 20 feet by 20 feet, with a stone fireplace that could warm it through the worst storms. A loft with a ladder held his bedroll and a few things he owned. Shelves on the walls had jars of food, bullets, and tools that meant life or death in this harsh place. Thunder, his horse, snorted softly from the small stable Jed built next to the cabin. The horse had been his only pal for 7 years, a steady friend who just needed food, water, and a little talk now and then. Jed liked Thunder's quiet smarts. The horse could sense storms or danger way before Jed could. The morning air was sharp and fresh as Jed stepped outside to care for his animals. His breath made little clouds that disappeared fast in the dry mountain air. The sky was a pale blue above the peaks, but Jed knew it could turn bad quick. November in the mountains meant always being ready. As he tossed hay to Thunder, his mind wandered to memories he usually kept locked away. Sarah died 7 winters ago, along with their unborn baby, from a fever that swept through their little Kansas farming town like a wildfire. The doctors couldn't do anything but watch as the sickness took young and old after burying his wife. And the future they planned, Jed sold their farm and rode west, looking for a place empty enough to match the hole in his heart. The mountains gave him what he needed: quiet, loneliness, and challenges that took all his focus. Here, surviving depended on skill and planning, not luck or other people's cruelty. The wilderness had rules he could get and respect. It might kill him, but it would do it fair, without lies or meanness. He built this life on purpose, cutting out every extra comfort or connection. His closest neighbors, if you could call them, that lived 20 miles down the mountain. Twice a year, he rode to Copper Falls for stuff like salt, bullets, coffee, and sometimes a book. The townsfolk looked at him with a mix of respect and caution. Mountain men were admired for their skills and independence, but they also seemed a bit dangerous, which kept people at a safe distance. Jed liked it that way. Talking took energy he saved for important stuff. People brought problems, expectations, and the chance of loss, things he swore to avoid after Sarah died. Better to live simple, honest, with just thunder for company and the seasons to show time passing. The wind got stronger as he finished his chores, bringing the smell of a coming storm. Thunder lifted his head, sniffing the air, ears perked with attention. Jed trusted the horse's instincts more than his own when it came to the mountain's moods. Something was coming, storm or trouble, he wasn't sure yet. Inside the cabin, he added wood to the fire and started his evening routine early. The Y journal caught his eye, and for a second he thought about opening it. Sarah's anniversary was coming up December 3rd, the day she was taken from him. Every year, that date hit like an old cut, sharp but not surprising anymore. Instead, he grabbed a piece of pine and his carving knife. His hands felt good shaping the wood, making small figures of wolves, eagles, and bears that captured the wild spirit around him. These carvings weren't for sale or show. They just gave his hands something to do during long winter nights when thoughts got too heavy. The wind howled around the cabin now, and thunder neighed nervously from the stable. Jed put down his carving and went outside to check. The sky had gone dark, heavy clouds rolling over the peaks like a gray blanket pulled over blue cloth. This was going to be a big storm, the kind that could drop 3 feet of snow and trap a guy for days. He quickly secured anything that might blow away, checked the stable door's latch, and brought extra firewood inside. Back in the cabin, he built up the fire for a long burn and went back to carving. The storm would rage all night, but he was ready. The cabin had survived 15 Montana winters, and it had survived this one too. As night fell and the wind got louder, Jed's thoughts drifted back to the journal. Sarah's sketched face seemed to watch him from across the room, patient and kind, like she was in life. She had a way of comforting him without words, easing his worries. Sometimes he wondered what she'd think of the man he'd become. Tougher, quieter, more careful with his heart than the young farmer who loved her so much. The storm hit hard around midnight, turning the world outside into a wild mix of wind and snow. Jed lay in his loft, listening to the cabin creak under the storm's attack, but he wasn't scared. The cabin was strong, his supplies were good, and being alone was his old friend. Whatever the storm brought, he'd face it like he faced everything for 15 years. Alone, ready, and only asking fate for a chance to keep going. But as he fell asleep, Thunder's nervous energy from earlier stuck in his mind like a warning he couldn't quite place. The horse sensed something more than just weather, something that had come with the storm and changed everything Jed thought he knew about his careful life. 3 hours before dawn, that something crashed into his world, more dangerous than any. Blizzard, in the form of a passed-out woman whose very presence would shake every wall he'd built around his broken heart. The sound that woke Jed wasn't part of the storm. Thunder's loud neigh cut through the wind's howl like a sharp knife, full of alarm that meant danger was close. Jed rolled out of his bedroll, instantly awake, grabbing the rifle he always kept nearby. The cabin's only window showed nothing but swirling white snow. Something was out there, spooking his steady horse. He pulled on his boots and heavy coat, then stepped into the wild storm. The wind tried to steal his breath as he pushed toward. Thunder's frantic calls. Snow stung his face like sand, and he could barely see 3 feet ahead. Following the horse's noise, he reached the stable door. Thunder was pressed against the back wall, eyes wide with fear. The horse was staring at something beyond the stable, something the storm had brought to their lonely spot. Jed grabbed a lantern and pushed back into the blizzard, following Thunder's gaze to the pine trees near his clearing, and overturned. Stagecoach lay there like a broken toy, its wheels spinning slowly in the wind. Snow was already burying it, but Jed could see the dark shapes of dead horses, now still and cold. The coach's door was open, showing a mess of scattered stuff and snow inside, but it was the small figure by the coach's back wheel that stopped his heart. A woman lay still in the snow, her dark dress already covered with white. She looked tiny, delicate, even under her heavy coat, and completely still. For a moment, Jed thought she was another victim of the mountain's harshness. Then she moved just a little, so small he almost missed it. Thunder neighed again, urgent. Jed knelt beside her, his rough hands checking for life. Her pulse was weak, her breathing shallow and uneven. She was alive, but just barely, and the storm wasn't done trying to kill her. Without thinking, he picked her up. She was lighter than he expected, her body limp against his chest. Even half frozen, she seemed different from the tough women he sometimes saw in Copper Falls. Her hands, peeking out from wool gloves, were soft, not calloused. Her face, pale from cold, had a fancy beauty that spoke of a protected life, not frontier struggles. Getting back to the cabin was a fight against wind and snow that wanted to take them both. Jed's muscles burned as he pushed through knee-deep drifts, but he kept going with stubborn grit. Behind them, the storm started erasing the stagecoach and its sad cargo. Inside the cabin's warm glow, he laid her on his only chair, by the fire. Her breathing was still weak, her skin cold as mountain rock. Hypothermia was setting in, a killer as sure as any bullet if he didn't act fast. Working quickly, like he'd handled emergencies alone before, Jed started peeling off her wet clothes. Her dress was fancy wool, now soaked and frozen stiff. Under it, layers of clothes showed she was rich and ready for winter travel. As he worked, trying to respect her privacy while saving her life, he found something that made him pause. Tucked in her bag, wrapped in oilcloth, was a white silk dress, clearly a wedding gown, fancy with lace and pearls, still perfect despite the journey. Seeing it stirred something uneasy in his chest, a reminder of promises and a life he'd left behind. He wrapped her in his warmest blankets and moved her to his bed in the loft, knowing body heat was key to saving her. Her dark hair, loose from its pins, spread across his pillow like spilled ink. In the firelight, he saw she was younger than he thought, maybe 27 or 28, with delicate features that showed a life free of hard work. As hours passed and the storm raged outside, Jed kept watch. He warmed water for her to drink when she woke, placed hot stones around her, and checked for signs she was waking up. Near dawn, her eyelids fluttered, and she made small noises of distress. When Charlotte Whitmore's eyes finally opened, they were bright blue, like a summer sky, catching light even in the dim cabin. For a moment she stared at the rough ceiling, confused. Then she realized where she was and sat up with a gasp that turned into a scared cry. "Where am I? What happened?" Her voice was fancy, like someone educated back east, but it shook with fear and tiredness. Jed stepped into her view and she freaked out, scrambling back in the bed, clutching the blankets, eyes wide with panic. "Don't touch me! Stay back!" "Easy," he said calmly, keeping his voice low. "You're safe. Your stagecoach crashed in the storm. I brought you here." But to Charlotte, he was just a big, bearded stranger in rough clothes, looming over her in a strange place. Her foggy mind jumped to the worst ideas. "Where are my clothes? What did you do to me?" "Saved your life," Jed said plainly. "You were half frozen. Wet clothes would have killed you." He pointed to her stuff, now drying by the fire. "Everything's there. I didn't take anything." She stared at him, wary like a trapped animal, noticing his size, the rifle, by the wall, and how alone they were. When she spoke again, her voice had the tone of someone used to giving orders. "I want you to take me to the nearest town right now. My family will pay you whatever you want for my safety." Jed almost smiled. The idea that money could fight a Montana blizzard was funny. "Can't go anywhere now. Storm's still raging. And it's a 3-day ride to Copper Falls in good weather." The truth of her situation started sinking in. She was stuck with a stranger in the middle of nowhere, relying on his kindness to survive. Everything she'd learned about proper behavior and staying safe seemed useless in this wild place. "The other passengers?" she whispered, memories coming back in bits. "The driver, the guards, are they okay?" "They're gone," Jed said simply. There was no soft way to say it, and he wasn't one for sugarcoating. "You're the only one who made it." Charlotte's calm broke. She hid her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. The wedding dress in her bag was meant to be her escape from one trap, but now she was in another, maybe even scarier than an unwanted marriage. Jed stood there, unsure how to comfort a crying woman after years alone. Sarah was the last person. He'd held when she cried, and that was a different man. Finally, he said, "You're alive. That's something." When Charlotte looked up, tears had made clean paths through the dirt on her cheeks, but her eyes showed a strength that surprised him. "What do you want from me?" The question hung there like smoke from the fire. What did he want? He'd saved her on instinct, but now she was here, messing up his quiet life. She was everything he'd avoided. Pretty, fancy, tied to a world of problems he'd run from. "Nothing," he said finally. "When the storm's done and the trails are clear, I'll take you to town. You're safe here till then." But even as he said it, Jed felt something stirring in his guarded heart. Something risky and unwanted that whispered this woman might want everything he swore he'd never give again. The carved wooden wolf sat on the mantel, like it was watching the tension in the cabin. Jed had carved it during his second winter alone, when being by himself felt heavy. The wolf's eyes seemed to see everything, waiting, patient, like a hunter. Now, with Charlotte Whitmore curled up in his bed, those carved eyes seemed to laugh at his lonely life. Charlotte refused breakfast, sitting stiffly with the blankets pulled up like a shield. Her damp hair fell in waves, and even though she was tired, she held herself like she belonged in a fancy parlor, not a rough cabin. Every few minutes, her eyes darted to the rifle, the door, then him, like she was figuring out how to escape. "Storm won't stop for another day, maybe two," Jed said, stirring a pot of deer stew over the fire. The smell filled the cabin, rich and warm, but Charlotte's stomach was too knotted with fear to eat. "You gotta eat. Your body's been through a lot." "I'm not hungry," she said, but her stomach growled, giving her away. She hadn't eaten since the stagecoach left its last stop 2 days ago, and her body needed food to heal. Jed scooped stew into a wooden bowl and set it near her. "Suit yourself, but skipping food up here is a bad idea." His plain tone annoyed her more than yelling would have. Charlotte was used to men who either respected her status or tried to charm her. This guy treated her like a hurt animal, something to care for but not fuss over. "You talk about luxury," she said, her voice sharp, "but you live like a wild man out here." Her words hung there, and she regretted them right away. Whatever his reasons, he'd saved her life. Her fear and confusion needed an outlet, and snapping at him was easier than facing her situation. Jed's face didn't change, but his eyes showed a flicker of old hurt before going back to neutral. "Maybe I like wild company better than city folks," he said gently, but it stung. Charlotte felt her cheeks burn. She was acting like a spoiled kid, and part of her knew it wasn't fair. This man risked himself to save her, gave her his bed, his warmth, his food. Her proper Boston manners demanded better, even here. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That was mean." Jed looked surprised. In his world, people didn't often say sorry for sharp words, especially not fancy folks who thought they were better than mountain men. Her apology opened a tiny door for talking. "What's your name?" he asked, sitting with his own bowl of stew. "Charlotte Whitmore." She paused, then added, "Of the Boston Whitmores." It was automatic, a way to show her place in the world. "Jed Halt, just Jed," he said, not mentioning family or ties. Charlotte wondered if he had none, or if they just didn't matter here, where surviving was more important than status. "How long you lived here?" she asked, curiosity starting to push out some fear. The cabin, though rough, showed signs of careful work and long living. This guy built it to stay. 15 years, give or take, Jed said, eating slowly, thinking about how much to share. "Came west after my wife died. Kept going till I found a place far enough away." His simple words carried heavy meaning Charlotte couldn't fully understand. She'd lost her mom at 12, but nothing ever made her want to leave the world behind. "I'm sorry about your wife," she said. Jed nodded but didn't say more. Some stories weren't for sharing, especially with a stranger who'd leave soon. Charlotte looked around the cabin, noticing details she missed in her panic. A few well-read books lined one wall. Small carved animals sat on shelves, each one showing a bit of the wildlife outside. The furniture was basic but strong, made by hands that knew how to make things last. "You built all this yourself?" she asked. "Had to. Nearest neighbor's 20 miles down the mountain, and he's not big on company," Jed said. "No bragging, just facts." Building was something he had to do, not something to be proud of. Despite herself, Charlotte started respecting this strange man. Making a home from raw wilderness took skills she couldn't even imagine. In Boston, her biggest worry was managing servants or planning parties. Here, just staying alive was a big deal. The wolf carving caught her eye again, and she pointed to it. "You make that?" Jed looked at it, his face going far away for a moment. "Helps pass the winter. That one's from my second year here. Wolves used to come around looking for food. We had a deal. They stayed out of my way. I stayed out of theirs. Used to? Haven't seen a pack in 3 years. They moved deeper into the mountains when settlers started coming to the valleys," he said, sounding a little sad, like he missed old friends, not dangerous animals. Charlotte looked closer at the wolf. Even with simple tools, it looked alive, like the carver really knew wolves. "It's beautiful," she said, meaning it. Jed looked surprised, like beauty wasn't something he thought about. "Just whittling." "No," Charlotte said firmly. "It's art. In Boston, people pay a lot for stuff half as good as this." He seemed amused, not flattered. "Different world up here. Art's what you make when you're done staying alive." His words showed how different their lives were. Charlotte's world was full of fancy things and free time, where art was just for art's sake. Jed's world was all about need, where beauty only happened when you had a moment to spare. But watching him tend the fire with the same care he put into carving, Charlotte saw a different kind of art. The art of living on purpose, finding meaning in simple, necessary tasks. It was honest, and she liked that. The afternoon went on, the storm still raging. Charlotte finally took the stew, and it was good, even if it looked plain. As warmth filled her, some of her fear faded. This man, rough as he was, had only been kind to her. "Why'd you save me?" she asked suddenly. "You could have left me out there. No one would have known." Jed was quiet, poking the fire. When he spoke, his voice was soft but sure. "Because leaving someone to die when you can save them makes you less human. No matter how far you run from people, you can't run from that." His answer showed more about him than hours of talking could. Even with his lonely life and guarded heart, Jed was a good man who'd risk himself for a stranger because it was right. As evening shadows filled the cabin and the wind kept howling, Charlotte started seeing him differently. Maybe he wasn't a dangerous stranger. Maybe he was just a good guy who'd forgotten how to trust the world with his heart. A blue hair ribbon lay between the pages of Jed's journal, faded but soft like a pressed flower. It was Sarah's, from the morning she got sick, when the fever started taking her. Charlotte found it by accident when she bumped the journal off the table trying to get closer to the fire. The book fell open, and the ribbon floated to the floor like a secret. "I'm sorry," she said fast, picking up the book and ribbon. "I didn't mean to—" Her words stopped as she saw the drawings inside. A woman's face stared back from the yellowed pages, drawn with careful pencil lines that showed love and closeness. The woman was pretty in a gentle way, with kind eyes and a soft smile that seemed warm, even on paper. Jed's hand closed over hers as she held the ribbon, his rough fingers gentle. "That was my wife," he said simply. "Sarah." Charlotte looked from the drawing to his worn face. Seeing pain, that time had softened but never erased. The woman in the sketch was young, about Charlotte's age, with a look of trust and happiness that hurt Charlotte's heart for someone she never met. "She was lovely," Charlotte said softly, putting the ribbon back in the book carefully. "How long were you married?" 5 years, Jed said, closing the journal like it was something sacred. "Best years of my life, and I didn't know it till they were gone." His words hung in the fire-lit cabin, raw and honest, making Charlotte's chest tighten. She thought of her own engagement to Richard Pemberton, a cold deal made for her family's sake, not love. Her parents loved the match, seeing it as a perfect mix of old money and new wealth. She'd only felt dread. "Is that why you came here?" she asked. "To get away from the memories?" Jed stared into the fire like he was looking for answers in the flames. "Thought I was. Turns out you can't run far enough to escape. Yourself." He glanced at her, his dark eyes catching the firelight. "What about you? What are you running from?" The question caught her off guard. She'd told herself she was just visiting relatives out west, but the wedding dress in Her bag told a different story. The truth felt heavy. Years of proper manners fighting her sudden urge to be honest with this man who'd been so kind. "A wedding," she said finally. "My wedding, to be exact." Jed's eyebrows went up. "Must be some guy to chase you. All the way to Montana." "He's not chasing me," Charlotte said quickly. "At least I hope not. The wedding was supposed to be next month, but She took a shaky breath. "I couldn't do it, so I took my money and got on the first stagecoach heading west." "Not love, then," Jed said. It wasn't a question, and Charlotte was glad for his straightforwardness. In Boston, personal stuff was hidden behind polite words. Jed's plain talk felt freeing. "No, not love, duty, family, money, everything but what should matter most." She laughed, but it wasn't funny. Jed nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Family pressure's strong. Makes people do things they wouldn't pick themselves." "Did your family approve of Sarah?" Charlotte asked, then wished she hadn't. "Sorry, that's none of my business." "Sarah was a farmer's daughter and I was a farmer's son," Jed said, not offended. "Not much for families to argue about. We chose each other because we wanted to, not because it looked good on paper." His words showed everything wrong with Charlotte's situation. Richard Pemberton was good-looking, educated, rich, and perfect by her family's standards. But he was cold, calculating, and saw their marriage as a business deal, not love. "You were lucky," Charlotte said quietly. "To have that choice." "Was," Jed agreed. "Don't know if I'd have the guts to do it again." Something in his voice made her look closer. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, part tiredness, part maybe longing. The air between them felt heavier, full of something neither said out loud. "Storm's easing," he said suddenly, though the wind still rattled the shutters. It felt like he was pulling back from something risky. She nodded, but part of her felt let down. For a moment, they'd shared something real. Two people who'd lost things, talking honestly about pain and hope. Now the walls were going up again, and she missed the connection more than she expected. "How long till the trails are clear?" she asked. "A day, maybe 2. Depends on the snow and if the wind clears the passes." Jed stood to check the fire, but Charlotte thought he was really putting space between them. "And then you'll take me to town." "That's the plan." But his voice didn't sound sure, and something had changed during their talk about Sarah and lost love. The simple plan, rescue, shelter, leave, was getting messy. Charlotte studied his face as he worked the fire. Jed was handsome in a rugged way, not fancy or polished. His features were strong, weathered by mountain sun and wind. His hands were scarred but skilled, moving with confidence. His quiet strength and gentleness were appealing. Despite his size and the rifle always nearby, he'd been nothing but kind. When he changed her wet clothes to save her, he was respectful. When she was scared and rude, he was patient, not mad. "Jed," she said on impulse, then stopped, unsure what she meant to say. He turned from the fire, their eyes meeting across the small cabin. The moment stretched, full of possibilities. Neither named. Charlotte felt something warm and risky in her chest, not fear this time. "What is it?" he asked, his voice softer. "Nothing," she said fast, but she couldn't look away. "Just thank you for everything." Jed nodded slowly, his eyes still on hers. "You don't need to thank me, Charlotte." The way he said her name sent a shiver through her, not from cold. When had she let him use her first name? When had the formal distance between them turned into something closer? Outside, the wind kept hitting the cabin, but inside, the space felt too small, too warm, too full of unsaid things. Charlotte was very aware of the borrowed shirt she wore, of how Jed seemed to fill the room, of the dangerous path her thoughts were taking. She was running from a marriage she didn't want, and he was still grieving his wife. Neither was ready for the feelings growing like a fire catching dry wood. But as the storm roared and the night deepened, Charlotte wondered if some forces, like love, were just too strong to fight. Charlotte's teaching book sat open on the rough table, a reminder of the proper world she'd left. The chapter was about how young ladies should act, polite manners, proper talk, and keeping their virtue no matter what. It felt ironic as she sat in a mountain cabin, wearing a man's shirt, her hair loose, sharing space with a stranger who made her heart race in ways her Boston lessons never covered. The storm had calmed overnight, leaving a world covered in snow. Through the cabin's small window, Charlotte saw drifts almost as high as the roof. The wilderness stretched out, white and endless, beautiful but scary. "We're stuck here. A few more days," Jed said, coming back from checking on Thunder. Snow stuck to his coat and beard, his cheeks red from cold. "Trail down the mountain's blocked. I'll need to dig us out before we can go." Charlotte nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and worry. She should have been scared to stay longer, but part of her didn't want to leave this place. Or him. "Can I help?" she asked, closing the book. Jed looked surprised. "You ever done real work?" His question wasn't mean, just curious. "What's real work?" she asked with a small smile. "Chopping wood, hauling water, cooking over a fire," he said, pointing around the cabin. "Stuff that keeps you alive, not just busy." Charlotte thought about it. In Boston, her days were full of music lessons, French practice, charity meetings, and social visits. None of it needed to survive. "I haven't," she admitted, "but I'm ready to learn." There was a hint of something more in his voice, like he was inviting her into his world. It excited and scared her. "I'd like that," she said softly. The morning started with lessons on keeping a fire going. Charlotte learned it wasn't just tossing logs on flames. She had to know how different woods burned, how to save coals for overnight heat, and when to add fuel or let the fire breathe. Her first tries were clumsy, but Jed gently corrected her, showing her how to place kindling just right. When his hands touched hers to guide a log, she felt a warmth that wasn't from the fire. His touch was rough but careful, and she kept, stealing glances at him as he focused on teaching. "Fire's like everything here," he said, stepping back to let her try alone. "Respect it, understand it, and it'll keep you alive. Ignore it, and it'll kill you." His words felt bigger than just fire safety, like he was talking about the mountains, the animals, or maybe even himself. By noon, she was helping make their simple meal. Charlotte had never cooked more than tea, but Jed showed her how to turn basic stuff into good food. His directions were patient, though he hid a smile when she added way too much salt to the stew. "It's edible," he said after tasting it, though his face said he was being kind. "You're too nice," Charlotte said with a laugh. "In Boston, I was pretty good at things. Different skills up here," Jed said, taking another bite, this time looking like he meant his approval. "But you're catching on fast. Some folks never get mountain cooking." His small compliment meant more to her than any praise for her paintings or piano playing. This was real skill, something that mattered in a way social graces never could. As the afternoon went on, Charlotte watched Jed with growing interest. Everything he did had a purpose, done with skill from years of hard lessons. When he fixed a loose board in the cabin, his movements were quick and sure. When he checked his traps for meat, he read the forest like a book she couldn't understand. "How do you know so much?" she asked as they carried snow to melt for water. The simple job had her panting from wading through deep drifts. 15 years of messing up," Jed said simply. "The mountains teach tough lessons, but you don't forget them." "Did you always want to live like this?" Jed thought about it as they trudged back to the cabin. "No," he said finally. "When I was young, I wanted a farm, a wife, kids, a simple life, but not this simple." "Do you regret coming here?" "Used to," he said, his breath making clouds in the cold air. "First few years I was mad at God, fate, myself for not saving Sarah. But anger's a luxury when surviving takes all you've got. Eventually, I stopped looking back and started living now." Charlotte thought about that. Her whole life had been about looking forward to marriage, status, a future her family planned. Living in the moment, finding peace in daily tasks was new and appealing. Back in the cabin's warmth, she sat by the fire while Jed worked on small tasks. The teaching book caught her eye again, and she picked it up, seeing it differently. The rules that once seemed important now felt fake, disconnected from real life. "What are you reading?" Jed asked, noticing her frown. "Lessons for Young." "Ladies," Charlotte said, reading aloud. A woman's highest job is to guide her family with morals and comfort, always keeping the delicate manners that make women different from rough society. Jed chuckled. Whoever wrote that, never. Met a mountain woman. Wives of miners, trappers, homesteaders. They shoot as good as their husbands, deliver babies, bury kids, fight off bears to protect their families. His face turned thoughtful. They're gentle when it's needed, and tough as nails when it's not. Their best quality is their judgment. Charlotte tried to picture herself as that kind of woman. Strong, capable. It felt scary but exciting. Do you think I could be like that? Jed looked at her, seeing her eagerness, her willingness to learn, how she'd handled things that would have broken others like her. I think you're stronger than you know, he said. Question is, do you want to find out? A sound outside cut them off, thunder neighing with alarm. Jed grabbed his rifle and moved to the window with the smooth speed of someone used to danger. What is it? Charlotte whispered. Don't know yet, Jed said, tense. Could be wolves. The sound came again, and Charlotte realized. It wasn't a wolf. It was a human voice calling through the snow. Someone was out there, searching, and her heart sank. Had her family sent people after her? Had Richard not accepted her running away? Stay here, Jed ordered, but Charlotte was already heading for the door. No, she said firmly. If they're looking for me, hiding won't help. But when Jed opened the door, the figure stumbling through the snow wasn't from her family. It was a lone prospector, half frozen and out of his mind, calling for help in a voice cracked by cold and desperation. Jed rushed to help him, and Charlotte joined in, bringing another stranger into their safe space. As they worked to save the man's life, Charlotte realized she was already answering her own question about becoming a mountain woman. She was finding strength she didn't know she had, purpose in work that mattered. And with every hour beside Jed, she learned that some lessons couldn't be found in books. They had to be lived. Jed's father's pocket watch sat still in his hand, its hands stuck at 3:17, the moment Sarah took her last breath 7 years ago. He'd stopped it on purpose that awful morning, unable to stand the idea of time moving on without her. Now, as he sat by the fading fire with Charlotte sleeping in the loft, he stared at the watch, wondering if hearts, like watches, could start again after years of stillness. The prospector they'd saved 3 days ago was well enough to leave, but his short stay had changed something in the cabin. Charlotte had worked hard to nurse the man back to health, showing skill and strength that surprised them both. When she knelt by his side, cleaning his wounds with care, Jed saw hints of the woman she could become. Not the fancy Boston lady, but someone tougher, more real. You're awake, Charlotte's soft voice came from the loft's edge. Jed looked up to see her peering down through the railings. Couldn't sleep, he admitted, closing the watch and pocketing it. She climbed down the ladder, moving with confidence, no longer the helpless city woman who arrived in the storm. Her movements fit the cabin's rhythm, sure and steady. The borrowed clothes, his spare shirt and pants they'd adjusted, suited her better than her fancy dress ever did. Something wrong? She asked, sitting across from him. Jed thought about it. Something was wrong, but not how she meant. The loneliness he'd kept for 15 years was falling apart, and he wasn't. Sure, he wanted to stop it. Spring's coming, he said instead. Another month, maybe 6 weeks, and the high passes will be clear. Charlotte nodded, knowing what that meant. When spring came, their time together would end. She'd go back to her world, and he'd go back to being alone. The thought should have felt good, but it sat heavy in his chest. I've been thinking about that, she said quietly, about what happens when the snow's gone. You'll go to Copper Falls, catch a stage east, back to your family, your old life? Jed said, the words tasting bad. Will I? Charlotte's voice had a challenge in it. What if I don't want to go back? Jed's heart skipped, but he kept his eyes steady on hers. Your family's worried. They'll send search parties when the weather's good. Let them look, she said, her voice strong, like the mountain women he'd known. I'm not a kid, Jed. I'm 27, and I can choose my own path. What path is that? He asked, half afraid of her answer. Charlotte stared. Into the fire's embers, speaking slowly like she was figuring it out. I don't know yet, but it's not in Boston. Married to a man I don't love. living a life that feels like a pretty jail. The firelight showed changes in her face. Her skin wasn't pale anymore, but healthy from outdoor work. Her hands, once soft, had calluses from chopping wood and carrying water. Her eyes had a new confidence. "This life's not easy," Jed said carefully. "The mountains don't care about your plans or your grit. They'll kill you if you're careless for a second." "You could teach me," she said, her words full of possibility and danger. "You could show me how to survive." Here. Jed felt something crack open inside him, like ice breaking for spring water. The watch in his pocket felt alive, like time was moving again. "Charlotte," he said, her name rough in his throat. "I know it's a lot," she went on, leaning forward. "I'm not like the women you're used to, but I'm learning, Jed. I'm changing, and I think I could be happy here with you." Her words were brave, vulnerable, and scary in their honesty. Jed looked at her, really looked, and saw not the fancy lady from the storm, but a strong, beautiful woman who'd become a big part of his world. "I can't control myself around you," he said suddenly, the words slipping out. Charlotte's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Jed stood pacing to the window, like distance could protect him from his feelings. "You make me want things I gave up years ago. You make me remember what it felt like to hope for a future, not just get through the day." "Is that so bad?" "It is when I've got nothing to offer but a hard life and loneliness," he said, turning to face her, his face fierce with inner struggle. "You deserve better than a beat-up mountain man who forgot how to live with people." Charlotte stood, stepping toward him. "Don't I get to decide what I deserve? You don't know what you'd be giving up, don't I?" Her voice had heat now, frustrated at his assumptions. "I've lived that life, Jed. Fancy clothes, social status, endless boring tasks that filled my days but left me empty. I was treated like a pretty decoration, valued for how I looked and who I knew, not who I am." She stopped right in front of him, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her blue eyes. "These past weeks, working with you, learning from you, I've felt more alive than ever in Boston. More useful, more me." Jed's defenses wavered as he looked at her. The firelight caught the red in her dark hair, and he remembered how soft it felt when he carried her from the storm. How right she looked in his bed. How natural it was to wake up with her there. "I'm 15 years older than you," he said, grasping for reasons to stop this. "I'm set in my ways, hard to live with. I'll adapt. You don't know what winter's really like here. Months alone, storms that last weeks." "Then teach me," Charlotte said, touching his face, her warm palm against his bearded cheek. "Teach me everything I need to survive here, to thrive here with you." Her touch broke his last walls. With a sound half groan, half surrender, Jed pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like she was something precious he'd lost long ago. Charlotte leaned into him, her face against his chest, breathing in the smell of wood smoke, leather, and him. "I'm scared," he whispered into her hair. "I lost everything once. I don't know if I could handle losing you, too." "You won't lose me," Charlotte said fiercely, pulling back to meet his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere, Jed. I'm right where I want to be." When he kissed her, it was hungry, like a man starved for love. Charlotte kissed back with just as much fire, her hands gripping his shirt like she could hold them both in this moment. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, hinting at spring and new starts. Inside, two hurt souls found healing in each other's arms, learning that some kinds of saving only happen in the wild places of the heart. The wanted poster was old and torn, but the face drawn in black ink was clearly Jed's. Younger, no. Beard, but definitely him. Charlotte stared at it, her heart pounding as she read the words that changed everything. Wanted for murder. Jedediah Halt, formerly of Lawrence, Kansas. $500 reward. Considered armed and very dangerous. The paper had fallen from the saddlebags of one of the three men now surrounding their cabin. The leader, a tall man with mean eyes and a badge glinting in the morning sun, shouted from near the stable. "We know you're in there, Halt, and we know you've got the Whitmore girl. Come out with your hands up and maybe we can settle this nice and easy." Charlotte's blood froze at hearing her name. These weren't just bounty hunters after Jed, they were after her too. The safe world she and Jed had built over the past month broke like ice under a hammer. Inside, Jed stood still by the window, rifle in hand, his face pale with something like defeat. "I should have told you," he said quietly, not looking at her. "Told me what?" Charlotte whispered. "About Kansas, about why I really came to the mountains." His knuckles were white on the rifle. "There was a man named Richard Pemberton." Charlotte's world spun. "Richard Pemberton? My Richard Pemberton?" Jed's head snapped toward her, surprise replacing his grim look. "You're what?" "My fiancé. The man I ran away from marrying." Charlotte felt sick, pieces of a terrible puzzle falling into place. "What does he have to do with this?" Before Jed could answer, the leader's voice cut through again. "Time's running out, Halt. Mr. Pemberton wants his property back, and he's not patient. The girl comes with us, and you face justice for what you did to his partner." "His partner?" Charlotte repeated, the words strange in her mouth. Jed closed his eyes for a second, then met her gaze. "Thomas Pemberton, Richard's cousin. I was accused of killing him in a land fight outside Lawrence 7 years ago." The timeline hit Charlotte like a punch. 7 years ago, the same time Sarah died. "Just after," Jed said, his voice empty. "I was grieving, not thinking. Straight. When Thomas Pemberton tried to push me off my family's land with fake papers, I fought back. But when it was over, he was dead, and I was the only one left to tell the story." "But you didn't kill him," Charlotte said, sure of it. She knew Jed's heart, his kindness, his respect for life. Whatever happened, murder wasn't him. "No," Jed said simply. "But Richard got the sheriff to believe I did. Had witnesses who swore I shot Thomas in cold blood. I barely got out alive." Charlotte's mind raced, connecting dots. Richard's rush to marry her despite barely knowing her. His family's sudden wealth around the time Jed fled. The way he talked about justice like it was a tool, not a belief. "He's been hunting you all these years," she said, understanding hitting her. "And when I ran away, he figured out you might have found me." Jed nodded grimly. "Mountain men talk, even spread out. Word gets around about who's where. It wouldn't take much to link your disappearance to my hideout." Richard's manipulation became clear. He didn't court her for love or money, but because her family's connections could help him find Jed, the man he thought killed his cousin. Her running away gave him the perfect excuse to chase her west. "We've got your woman out here." "Halt!" another voice shouted. "Pretty thing, all dressed up in her traveling clothes. Mr. Pemberton's real eager to see his bride again." Charlotte's blood turned cold. A fourth rider had snuck around the cabin and through the back window. She saw him holding a woman in a blue dress, tied up and gagged, but it wasn't her. "They've got someone else," she whispered. "Some poor woman they think is me." Jed cursed, the first harsh word she'd heard from him. "Sarah Hutchkins," he said, looking out the window. "School teacher from Copper Falls. Looks enough like you from far away to trick them." The situation's weight hit Charlotte. If she showed herself to save the woman, she'd be handing herself to Richard's lies. But if she stayed hidden, Sarah Hutchkins would pay for their fight. "There's something else," Jed said quietly, his face grim. "What? If Richard's been after me for 7 years and he's gone this far to find me, it's not just about justice for his cousin." Jed's voice was heavy. "Thomas Pemberton was murdered, but not by me. I think Richard killed his own cousin and needed someone to blame." Charlotte felt the world shift again. "You think Richard?" "I think Richard killed Thomas to keep something secret. Something Thomas found out about his business." Jed's jaw tightened. "We're not just fighting bounty hunters. We're up against a murderer who's been hiding his tracks for 7 years. The sound of horses moving closer snapped them into action. Charlotte grabbed the wanted poster and tucked it into her shirt, evidence they might need later. Jed checked his rifle and moved to a small gun port in the cabin wall, built years ago for emergencies like this. "Can we save Sarah?" Charlotte asked, thinking of rescue plans. "Not without putting ourselves in the open," Jed said. "They've got her where any move we make could hurt her." "Then we have to be smarter than them," Charlotte said, her voice strong. "You know these mountains better than anyone. There's gotta be a way." Jed looked at her with something like pride. "You're talking about a fight, Charlotte. These guys don't play nice. They'll kill without thinking if it gets them what they want. Then we make sure they don't get the chance." Charlotte stood by him at the gun port, her shoulder touching his arm. "You said the mountains teach hard lessons. Teach me this one." Outside, the leader was getting impatient. "Last chance, halt! Come out now, or we make this bad for everyone." Jed's hand found Charlotte's, squeezing gently. "I need you to know something," he said quietly. "These past weeks with you have been the best since Sarah died. You brought me back." "To life, Charlotte. Don't forget that. Nothing's gonna happen to us," she said fiercely. "We're getting out of this, saving that woman and showing Richard for what he is." But even as she spoke, Charlotte saw the tough odds. 4 armed men against 2, with an innocent hostage making every plan harder. The cabin, their safe place, was now their fortress, and the love they'd found would be tested by danger and betrayal. The fight for their future was about to start, and Charlotte prayed Jed's survival lessons would be enough for the toughest battle of their lives. The hidden Winchester rifle came out from its oilcloth wrap, like a deadly secret finally shown. Jed's hands moved over it with skill, checking it, counting bullets, getting ready for a fight he'd hoped to avoid. The rifle had been with him, through the war and his escape from Kansas, but for 15 years, it stayed hidden under the cabin floor. "How many bullets?" Charlotte asked quietly, watching him with focus, knowing her life might depend on his answer. 47, Jed said calmly, though his shoulders showed tension. "Plenty if I use them right." Outside, the Bounty, hunters had settled around the cabin, sure of their advantage but cautious of Jed's reputation. The leader, Marshal Jake Coleman, kept shouting demands and threats, but Jed could hear the nervousness in his voice. These guys knew they were dealing with someone dangerous. "What about Sarah Hutchins?" Charlotte asked, looking out the back window at the tied-up schoolteacher 50 yards away. "We can't let her get hurt for our fight." "We won't," Jed said firmly. "But saving her means getting past her guard, and that's tough. While they've got us stuck here." Charlotte nodded, her mind racing with ideas she'd never needed in Boston. "What if we make them come to us?" Jed looked surprised. "Explain." "They want me alive. Richard made that clear. And they want you alive too, or at least proof they got the right guy," Charlotte said, her voice growing sure. "They can't just burn us out or shoot wildly. They have to take us alive. So they'll have to come in eventually, and we'll be ready." She moved to the main room, checking angles and hiding spots with new eyes. "This cabin's like a fort. 1 door. Tiny windows too small for a man to climb through, and we know every corner." Jed followed her, thinking, impressed. "You want them to fight on our ground, not theirs?" "Exactly," Charlotte said, her change from fancy lady to mountain planner complete. "But we need Sarah safe first. Can you hit her guard from here?" Jed checked the distance through the gun port. "It's a far shot, and if I miss—" "You won't miss," Charlotte said, trusting him completely. "I've seen you hunt. You don't take shots you can't make." Her faith in him steadied something in Jed. He'd been alone so long that having someone believe in him felt like a gift. "After I shoot, they'll know where we are. Things'll get rough fast." "I get it," Charlotte said, checking the smaller rifle Jed taught her to use. "What do you need me to do?" Jed looked at her, seeing a partner he could count on. "Watch the door. Anyone comes through without asking, shoot. Don't wait. Don't try to just hurt them. These guys won't show mercy, so don't you." Charlotte nodded, serious. "What about after, when it's done?" "Depends on how it ends," Jed said, his face grim but determined. "If we make it, we've got to deal with Richard Pemberton. He's the real problem. Stopping his men won't stop him. He'll face justice for what he did to your family and us," Charlotte said, her voice hard. "I know people back east, Jed. People with power. When they hear the truth about Richard—" "If we live to tell it," Jed said. Charlotte stood beside him, her hand on his rifle. "We have to. Too many innocent people have suffered for his lies." Jed squeezed her hand, then got ready at the gun port. "When I shoot, they'll scatter. That's Sarah's best chance to run. Watch for my signal, then cover me while I go for her." "Jed," Charlotte said, stopping him as he aimed. "I love you." The words hit him harder than any bullet. He turned to look at her, seeing hope, trust, and love in her blue eyes, things he thought he'd lost forever. "I love you too," he said simply. "More than I thought I could after Sarah." "Then we're gonna make it." Charlotte said fiercely. Because I'm not losing you now. Outside, Marshal Coleman was losing patience. Time's up, Holt! We're coming in! Jed aimed at the guard holding Sarah Hutchkins. The man was young, jumpy, watching the cabin with nervous eyes. One clean shot would drop him and give Sarah a chance. Ready? Jed asked softly. Charlotte took her spot by the door, rifle ready. Ready. The moment stretched, full of what could happen. Their love, their plans, their dreams of a mountain life hung on this fight. Now, Jed whispered and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out like thunder and chaos broke loose. The guards spun and fell. Sarah Hutchkins ran for the trees, and the other 3 bounty hunters dove for cover, yelling mixed-up orders. Sarah's clear, Charlotte shouted, watching the schoolteacher vanish into the forest. She's heading for town. But their win didn't last. Marshal Coleman got his men together faster than expected, and now they were moving on. The cabin from 3 sides, using the land for cover while shooting to keep Jed and Charlotte pinned down. They're pros, Jed said grimly, watching their smart moves. This won't be easy. Nothing worth having is, Charlotte said, and despite everything, Jed smiled at her grit. Bullets started hitting the cabin, testing their defenses, trying to make them show themselves. Jed fired back carefully, keeping them at bay. But he saw the problem. They had limited bullets and no way out, while the hunters had time, numbers, and could call for help. There's something else, Charlotte said during a quiet moment. Something I should have thought of sooner. What? Richard doesn't just want you dead, he wants you ruined, she said. If these guys kill you here, he can say you died fighting arrest for his cousin's murder. But if we prove you're innocent? How? Jed asked, as more shots hit the cabin. Charlotte pulled out the wanted poster. This is signed by Sheriff Morrison of Lawrence, Kansas. But I've seen Richard's handwriting, Jed, hundreds of times on invitations and letters. That's not the sheriff's signature. It's Richard's, disguised, but I know it. Jed looked at the poster, understanding dawning. Evidence. Proof that could clear me and show he's the real killer. But only if we live to show. It, Charlotte said, her eyes burning with anger. The sound of wood breaking meant the hunters were stepping up their attack. The cabin door shook as something heavy. An axe or sledgehammer hit it, trying to break through. Time's up, Jed said, aiming at the door. Here they come. Charlotte got ready, heart pounding but hands steady. Outside, Coleman shouted empty warnings. Just talk to justify the violence coming. The door burst open in a shower of splinters and the real fight for their future began. Everything they'd learned about survival, love, and standing together would be tested in the next few minutes of gunfire and desperation. As the first man stepped through the broken door, Charlotte felt no fear, just a fierce need to protect. The life she'd built with the man she loved, no matter the cost. Charlotte's torn petticoat lay in strips on the cabin floor, turned from fancy cloth into bandages now wrapped around Jed's hurt shoulder. The first attack had been pushed back, but it cost them. Coleman's men got closer than expected, and one bullet hit Jed before he drove them back. How bad? Charlotte asked, tying the last bandage with steady hands despite the chaos. I'll live, Jed said through gritted teeth, testing his arm. The bullet went through muscle, not bone. Painful, but he could still fight. I'll be slower on this side, though. Charlotte nodded, already rethinking their plan to account for his injury. She'd changed from a sheltered lady to a real partner, crossing a line in the fight she couldn't undo. 2 of Coleman's men were dead outside, proof of Jed's sharp aim and Charlotte's surprising skill with a rifle. But Coleman and one other guy were still alive, and their anger at being outfought made them reckless and dangerous. They'll try again soon, Jed said, reloading his rifle carefully. Coleman takes losses personal. As if he heard, Coleman's voice came from behind a flipped-over wagon he was using for cover. You killed good men, Halt. Men with families waiting back home. Men who came to kill an innocent man, Charlotte shouted before Jed could stop her, her voice strong across the fight. Men ready to kill for Richard Pemberton's dirty money. The silence after her words made Jed worry they'd said too much. But when Coleman spoke again, his tone was different, sly. So, the lady knows what this is about. Richard said, you might have filled her head with lies about his family. The only lies are Richard's, told for 7 years. Charlotte's anger was bright and clear, fueled by what she'd learned about the man she almost married. Thomas Pemberton was murdered by his own cousin. A long silence, then Coleman's ugly laugh. You think I don't know that, girl? You think we believe that wanted poster's real? The truth hit Charlotte hard. These weren't lawmen after justice. They were hired killers who knew exactly what they were covering up. Then why? She shouted, though she already guessed the answer. Because Richard pays better than honest work, Coleman said without shame. And dead people don't fight back or hire lawyers to dig up old murders. Jed's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. What about the school teacher? She didn't deserve your violence. Collateral damage, Coleman said coldly. Worked out, though. Helped us draw you out. His casual cruelty told Charlotte everything about the men they faced. They'd kill anyone in their way for money. They won't let us walk away, she said quietly to Jed. Even if we give up, they'll kill us to keep us quiet. I know, Jed said, determined. We end this here, one way or another. The afternoon sun cast long shadows, giving the hunters cover for their next move. Jed saw Coleman planning behind his barricade, waiting for dark to attack. There's something I need to tell you, Charlotte said urgently. About Richard? It can't wait, she said, grabbing his good arm. I think Thomas Pemberton found something about Richard's business. Something worth killing for. Jed's focus sharpened. What kind? My dad mentioned once how the Pemberton fortune came out of nowhere. Richard went from a clerk to owning half of Kansas City's business district. Charlotte pieced together bits of overheard talk. What if Thomas found proof Richard was stealing from clients? Or worse, land fraud, Jed said, understanding. That fake deed he used on my farm. What if it wasn't the first? It all clicked. Richard didn't just kill his cousin to steal Jed's land. He was running a big scheme to cheat landowners across Kansas, using his lawyer job to fake papers. Thomas must have found proof and threatened to tell. He's not just hiding one murder, Charlotte whispered. He's protecting a whole criminal empire. A sound outside, a scrape of metal on stone, a quiet step, meant Coleman was moving closer in the shadows. Get ready, Jed said, moving to the gun port despite his pain. This is their final push. Charlotte watched the back window, ready for a sneak attack, rifle in hand. The waiting felt heavy, knowing the next. Minutes would decide if they lived or died. Charlotte, Jed said softly, eyes on the danger. Yes? If something happens to me, nothing's happening to you, she said fiercely. But if it does, he went on quietly, promise you'll get that evidence to real authorities. Not Richard's hired men. Charlotte's throat tightened, but she nodded. I promise. But we're both getting out alive, Jed. We've got too much to live for. A shadow moved fast along the cabin's east wall, and Jed's rifle fired, dropping the man. But Charlotte caught movement at the back window. Coleman's last man trying to break in. Her shot hit him square, and he fell silently. The wind felt. Empty, though, because Coleman was still out there, wounded and desperate, more dangerous than ever. One left, Jed said grimly. The worst one, Charlotte said, settling in for the final fight. The wedding ring slipped off Jed's finger. As he reloaded, the gold band that tied him to Sarah's memory for 7 years rolling across the floor to Charlotte's boot. It was a small sign of letting go and starting new, even in their desperate fight. Charlotte glanced at it, knowing what it meant, while keeping watch for Coleman. That ring was Jed's past, his grief, his long road back to love. Seeing him take it off showed his commitment to their future, if they had one. He's circling to the front, Jed said, tracking Coleman through the gun port, aiming for the door. Let him come, Charlotte said, steady despite her racing heart. We know this cabin better than he does. But Coleman was sneaky. Instead of rushing in, he threw burning sticks onto the cabin roof, trying to smoke them out or force them to leave their spots. The smell of burning wood filled the air, and Charlotte heard flames catching above. Fire, Jed said grimly. Should have seen that coming. How long do we have? Charlotte asked, grabbing the water bucket. Not long enough, Jed said, seeing their options shrink. He's forcing us to choose. Burn inside or come out where he can shoot. Us! Charlotte climbed onto the table, trying to douse the flames through ceiling gaps, but the fire spread too fast, and smoke filled the cabin. "There," Jed said, pointing to a corner where he'd built a root cellar under the floor. "We can get out through the tunnel." Charlotte stared, surprised. "What tunnel?" "Emergency exit. Dug it my second year after wolves trapped." "Me for 3 days," Jed said, pulling up hidden floorboards to show a narrow passage. "Comes out 50 yards behind the cabin near the creek." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it means losing the cabin," Jed said simply. "Everything I built, everything that kept me alive, it'll burn." Charlotte understood what he was giving up. The cabin wasn't just a house. It was his safe place, his memory of Sarah, his world of solitude. Losing it was like losing part of himself. "We can rebuild," she said firmly. "Together." Jed's smile was quick but real. "Together," he agreed. The tunnel was tight and dark, barely big enough for Jed. Charlotte went first, feeling her way along rough walls, while Jed followed, his hurt shoulder making it harder. Behind them, the cabin filled with smoke and flames as Coleman's plan worked. They came out near the creek, hidden by thick willows Jed had left for cover. From there, they saw Coleman against the burning cabin, waiting for them to come out the front door they'd never use. "He thinks we're inside," Charlotte whispered. "His mistake," Jed said, raising his rifle. "And his last." But before he could shoot, Coleman turned toward them, some noise or instinct warning him. His revolver fired, the bullet slicing through willows near Charlotte's head. Jed's shot was instant and perfect. Coleman staggered, his gun falling, but he stayed up, blood spreading across his shirt, eyes burning with crazy determination. "You killed them all," he gasped, talking to no one real. "Sarah, Thomas, all of them, just like Richard said." "Richard lied," Charlotte called, stepping out despite Jed's grab. "He lied to everyone." Coleman's laugh was weak and bitter. "Richard pays $500 for your body, girl. Worth dying for." He lunged, a hidden knife in hand. Jed fired, again, and Coleman fell, his attack useless. The knife sank into the creek, and Marshal Jake Coleman was gone forever. "Is it over?" Charlotte asked, barely believing they'd made it. "For now," Jed said carefully. "But Coleman was just the hired guy. Richard's still out there, and he won't stop till we're dead." Charlotte looked at the burning cabin, watching 15 years of Jed's life turn to smoke. It should have hurt, but she felt free. The past was burning, making room for something new. "Then we go to him," she said firmly. "We take the fight to Richard before he sends more killers." Jed stared, surprised. "Charlotte, he's got money, power, connections. And I've got something he doesn't," she cut in. "I know who he really is. I've seen his handwriting, heard his lies, watched him fool my family for months." She pulled out the wanted poster, its forged signature clear in the firelight. "This is our weapon, Jed. This clears your name and makes him pay for Thomas, for you, for all his victims." Jed looked from the burning cabin to the woman who'd become his partner, seeing a mountain woman ready for anything to protect their life. Sarah's ring lay on the ground, a last piece of the past, as Charlotte took his hand, their fingers. Locking together, Jed knew some things were worth more than gold, safety, or the walls around a broken heart. They had each other, the truth, and a love that could face anything. Richard Pemberton was about to learn that some forces, like wildfires, mountain storms, or two people fighting for their future, couldn't be bought, controlled, or stopped. The real fight was just starting. The new wooden sign read, "Halstead, Est 1885, in Jed's careful carving, the letters painted gold, shining in the morning sun through the pines. Charlotte touched the words, amazed at how much had changed in the 6 months since Coleman's death and Richard Pemberton's arrest. The trial in Kansas City was a big deal, with newspapers everywhere telling the story of the crooked lawyer, who killed his cousin and hunted an innocent man for 7 years. Charlotte's testimony, backed by the fake wanted poster and Sarah Hutchkins's story about the bounty hunters, tore apart Richard's lies. More victims came forward, families who lost land to his scams, partners he'd cheated or scared quiet. Richard Pemberton was now in prison for 25 years, his criminal empire done. The judge cleared Jed's name and apologized for his years of wrongful blame. Jed didn't care much about the apology. He'd found something better than that in Charlotte's love. Like your sign? Charlotte asked, coming up with 2 steaming coffee cups in the crisp mountain air. Like my partner, Jed said, taking a cup. The sign's just wood and paint. Charlotte smiled, thinking of the scared woman who woke up in this cabin almost a year ago. That person felt like a stranger now, someone who lived a careful life full of empty rules. The woman she'd become was tougher, more real than she ever thought she could be. The new cabin was bigger, built for both of them, with real windows, shelves for books she ordered from back east, and a kitchen where she practiced cooking with Jed's help. Most of all, it had 2 rocking chairs on the porch where they watched. Sunsets turned the peaks gold and red. Letter came yesterday, Charlotte said, pulling an envelope from her apron. From my sister Margaret. Jed raised an eyebrow. Charlotte's family had finally accepted her choice to stay in Montana, though it took strong letters and a visit from Margaret to convince them she wasn't kidnapped. Seeing Charlotte happy and thriving helped, too. Good news or bad? He asked. Weird news, Charlotte said, opening it. She says Richard's conviction shook things up back home. Other big families were his victims, too, and the legal world in Kansas City's getting a big overhaul. She read more, then smiled. Oh, and the Pemberton mansion's being sold to pay back his victims. Margaret says they're turning it into a school for orphans. Fitting, Jed said, satisfied. Thomas would have liked that. They stood quietly, sipping coffee, watching thunder graze in the small pasture Jed fenced. The horse was older, moving carefully, but still alert and friendly. Charlotte loved him almost as much as Jed did, valuing his steady presence. Any regrets? Jed asked suddenly. Charlotte thought hard. She'd given up wealth, status, and family approval for this life. Her hands were rough, her skin weathered, her clothes simple and tough. None, she said firmly. Not one. And she meant it. The woman who ran from Richard was searching for something she couldn't name. Purpose, truth, a chance to be herself. She'd found it all with Jed, who taught her love wasn't about comfort, but about facing life's challenges. Together. What about you? She asked. Miss the quiet? Jed laughed warmly. Thought I would. 15 years of silence is hard to break, but sharing sunrises, talking through problems, making simple tasks feel like adventures, I can't imagine going back. Charlotte leaned against him, breathing in the smell of wood smoke and leather that meant home. Good thing you won't have to. Hoofbeats on the trail interrupted them. Visitors were rare, but not as rare as in Jed's lonely years. Word had spread about the couple who took down Richard Pemberton's empire, and travelers sometimes came for advice or just to meet them. The rider was Sarah Hutchkins, the schoolteacher they'd saved. She'd become a close friend, one of the few who understood what they'd been through. Morning, folks, Sarah called, getting off her horse with ease. Got news from town and figured you'd want to hear it. What kind? Charlotte asked, taking Sarah's horse to the stable. The territorial governor sent someone to Copper Falls, Sarah said, excited. They're looking for experienced folks to keep order in the northern mining camps. Your reputation for handling tough stuff reached high places. Jed frowned. They offering me a badge? More than that, Sarah said. They're offering you and Charlotte a chance to start a new settlement in the high country. Government support, supplies, and authority to bring in families and build a real community. Charlotte's heart raced. Helping build something new, using their hard-earned skills to make a safe place for others, felt right. What's it involve? Jed asked, interest showing behind his careful face. Surveying, picking a spot, finding good families, setting up basic law, Sarah listed. Dangerous but important, work that could shape the territory. Charlotte and Jed shared a long look, understanding each other without words. Their quiet life here was precious, but it was also practice for something bigger, using their skills to help others find hope and home in the wild. We'll think about it, Jed said. Don't think too long, Sarah said. They need an answer in a month. After Sarah left, they spent the afternoon talking about the offer, weighing risks and rewards. By evening, they'd decided, knowing it was what they'd choose from the start. One more year here, Charlotte said, sitting in their Rocking chairs, watching the sunset paint the mountains. One more year to enjoy this, then we'll build something bigger. One more year? Jed agreed, taking her hand. As night fell and stars appeared, Charlotte thought about their journey. She'd come to the mountains, escaping a life like a pretty prison. She'd found freedom with a man who'd forgotten how to hope. Together they'd faced killers, storms, and gunfights, built a home, and grew a love from broken hearts. They'd learned trust, courage, and love that grew stronger under pressure couldn't be bought or given by society. The sign by their doctor showed their victory. Halstead, 1885. But the real proof of their love was how they faced each day as partners, confident in each other's strength, knowing they'd meet any challenge together. In Montana's high country, where pines met rugged peaks and the wild tested every soul, Jedediah Halt and Charlotte Whitmore learned the strongest foundations weren't wood or stone, but trust, grit, and a love that could survive anything. Their story wasn't over. It was just beginning.